We'd never been in seas of that size. The swells were about 7 metres.
Oh, my God.
And so we sort of got out there fairly suddenly. The wind's behind you, which is a good thing. And I'm looking at these waves rearing up behind us, and I said to Anna, look, don't look back, just look forward. That's where we're going. You don't have to worry about what's going on behind us.
What do you do when you sell your mega successful company for a mega price tag? If you're Graeme Wood, you buy a boat, which sounds pretty standard for a millionaire, right? Except that he's not floating around the Hamptons on a yacht, sort of sipping champagne and soaking in the long sunsets. No, if you're Graeme Wood, you and your wife are the only two on board, battling huge storms around the Atlantic Ocean, sleeping in shifts, and trying to steer clear of literal pirates. And that's just what he does for fun. When the entrepreneur and philanthropist best known for running the pioneering travel website Wotif.com isn't at sea, he's most likely transforming wood chip mills or trying to replace agricultural chemicals with algae. So how did a kid from working-class Rockhampton become not just one of Australia's most important tech figures, but also one of our most effective environmentalists and philanthropists? I'm Kelly Reardon, and Wotif founder Graeme Wood is my guest on Curveball. Graeme, you were born in Rocky and you lived there until you were about 5. Can you describe for me early family life in regional Queensland?
Pretty boring, I guess, would be the summary. Very hot. Rocky was very flat. I had 2 sets of grandparents up there and they were fine, upstanding kind of citizens. They never put a foot wrong. My parents were much the same, so even though, I was a young kid, I realised that I was in a pretty straight family.
So how then did you become, I'm kind of interested in how you transformed from a working class kid in Rockhampton where everything is, pretty standard regional upbringing to, running one of the biggest companies in Australia. Was there something that ignited you in childhood around entrepreneurship?
Not entrepreneurship as such, but I guess ambition. It's a bit hard to put a finger on it, but family life was quiet. I was the first person as a, 10-year-old to actually bring a book into the house. They weren't great readers. They did watch television. And having started reading on my own volition, I felt inspired to actually do something useful with my life.
You'd moved to Brisbane with your family by this point, and home life is still a little bit dull, but there is one hobby that you enjoyed with your parents. What was it?
Yes, the only interesting thing my parents did was go fishing, in my estimation. And we were always at the beach, always paddling around in little dinghies, catching fish. And at school, primary school, I was part of a fishing club, and we'd go over to Moreton Island and walk up and down the beach. And in those days, you could fill a bag of bream and flathead and whiting in 2 hours. And what I noticed over the years was that catch diminished into pretty much nothing. And that distressed me. And that was my first inkling of being a conservationist.
I want to come back and really dig into that environment piece shortly, but your bachelor's degree, as I understand, was in economics. So what sort of career were you first setting out to have?
I was going to be an engineer. I did 3 years of engineering before the faculty and I decided I should try something else. I'd failed 2 of those. I then went to and did commerce and just got bored stupid. I just went to sleep in lectures, and I finally scraped enough units together to get into economics and finally passed it.
But it was more than 20 years after graduating from the University of Queensland that you went back to do a master's in information systems. So when did the light bulb go off for you around the potential of technology?
Well, this internet thing was starting to happen, and I'd always, I had a bit of a knack for programming. I'd taught myself to program at an early age. I would sit in the university library and just bang away at it, and I finally sort of weaseled my way into a job. And having written a few programs, I decided I'd launch out and start my own business, which I did.
And this is sort of before you really start working with people like IBM and NCR. What was it about, I guess, the intersection of entrepreneurship, business, tech? You know, were you trying to put all those things together deliberately at that point?
The main motivator was I read an ad in the paper. I think it was for somebody to go work at IBM. No, it was an article which said that software engineers were earning really good money. I thought, right, I'll have a crack at that. So I went and got a job at NCR, then IBM, and eventually from that experience started the first of many of my own businesses.
And there's a little sidebar that happens here because you're working in that sort of intersection of computers, technology, startups, but you end up in the Queensland egg industry. How did that happen?
Well, this was one of my businesses had gone kind of bad, and I was running out of money. I knew that New South Wales had deregulated the egg industry. This meant to farm eggs, you needed to buy a quota. New South Wales gave that quota money back to all those farmers, and they collectively, being very strategic and clever, went and bought more chooks, and the number of eggs coming on the market kind of doubled and trebled in a short space of time. So eggs in New South Wales were selling below the cost of production in Queensland. Queensland was still regulated. They were smart enough not to pay the money out. They were looking for an angle, I discovered, for somebody to break into the market so that the the rationalisation would happen through natural causes, shall we say. So I had to get an egg grader's license. I didn't know what an egg grader looked like. I bought one second-hand, and people were aware that I was sniffing around, so I had to sort of do it all quietly. And I bought one somewhere up north, and I said to the guy I bought it from, I said, now, what size truck would I need to put this on? He put it on the rail, and he told me. So I therefore had a rough idea what I was actually buying. So I took that egg grader, stuck it in a shed in some industrial estate, and went to outside Sydney somewhere and bought a semi-trailer load of eggs. I thought, right, this is the way to start an egg business. The day I got my egg grading license from some dude in DPI, I think it was, I picked it up. It was late in the afternoon, and I went over to Sunny Queen Eggs. The front door was open. I walked in. They were having an emergency board meeting, as it turned out. So I just walked into the board room with my egg grading license in my hand and said, "Hi, I'm Graeme Wood, and I've got an egg grading license." So the company secretary grabbed me, took me into another office, and I had no idea what was going to happen. But what did happen was I said, now you've got a problem, haven't you? I've got a semi-trailer load of eggs arriving tomorrow or whatever. I've got all the packaging ready to go. I said, let's work out the extent of the problem, and pulled out a piece of paper and started scribbling. This just sort of happened. And we worked out that the damage I would do them in lost revenue would equate to $10,000 a week. And I said, so if you pay me $10,000 a week to do nothing, we've got a deal.
And is that what happened?
That's what happened. That's probably illegal, but...
This is so great. So what were you trying to do? It's kind of shit-stirring, right?
Well, I thought, maybe there's a business in egg distribution. But I also realised that I just can't believe this will keep going, because there'll be other players come into the market. I'll get swamped. So I said, right, I would like to introduce free-range eggs into Queensland, because I didn't like the idea of chooks in cages. So we agreed that the $10,000 a week would reduce by the value of free-range eggs that I sold. So I was the first person in Queensland to sell free-range eggs. And over time, I thought this will last 6 months. It went for 2 years.
What did you learn during that period and some of your earliest startups that helped kind of formulate what was going on in your mind about what could work if you started a travel internet site called Wotif?
Just being alert to opportunities and being ready to jump very quickly. And I was still fiddling around with the eggs. That's when I went back to uni and did the Master of Information System. And I was doing some consulting work for a bunch of consultants, I guess they were, on economic modelling. And I've stumbled across a guy who was running, I forget the brand, it wasn't a Hilton, it was something like that, up the coast. And he said, could you model for me future prices of hotel rooms based on supply and demand? What he was really wanting was to discount unused hotel rooms at the last minute. And that's where the whole idea for Wotif came up. He was a guy who, in those days, to discount rooms at the last minute was impossible because it was a conventional wholesaler system. If he wanted to discount a room tomorrow, there was no way of getting it out to the marketplace.
So the thing that's interesting here, both with the eggs and then building out Wotif, is that you're seeing an opportunity that no one else has yet spotted. How do you see that opportunity? And then how do you know it's going to work?
I could see that if I could get enough hotels to create a market, and if I got out there quickly enough, then it didn't cost them anything to join up. They didn't have to sign a contract. I made it as easy as possible, and there was a fair bit of sweat for the first few weeks because no one bought any last-minute rooms. But eventually it started to happen. We launched with, I think, 60 hotels on the site. That was a struggle. I told a few fibs about what we were doing, but in terms of advertising, but nobody cared in the end. But when people laughed me out of the office when I was trying to sell them the idea originally, once that market started to work, they couldn't stay out of it. So that's when it took off in Australia. Then I took it to, I think New Zealand was next. Then I spent a year in the UK getting all that stuff happening over there.
And tell me about selling it to hotel chains who were initially reluctant, like to discount hotel rooms. If your set price at the Hilton is $250 a night, to agree to discount that to $120 a night just in order to fill the rooms, I imagine was somewhat controversial.
Their marketing department hated it, but the yield managers loved it. It was like in the olden days, you could go to Sydney Airport and you could get standby flights. So somebody doesn't turn up, there's a spare seat, half price, there you go. And the first iteration of Wotif was actually called standbyacom.com, which was such a terrible mouthful. I'm pleased that didn't go ahead.
How did you then go on to bring some other investors on board, particularly as you wanted to scale up? You had an incredible TAM, total addressable market, if you could get this thing going globally. How did you bring others on board?
When I first conceived the idea, I was going through a bit of personal strife. I was separating from my wife and family of, 30 years or something. And I was, I'd given her the house and, whatever you want to just sort of get out of there. And I'd built the model for this. I forget, it was in the late 90s. I was living alone. Between Christmas and New Year's Eve in this year, I sat down with my computer and actually designed the user interface and the database and the business model for the whole thing. And I thought it was pretty cool. It was probably aided and abetted by a few vodkas here and there because I wasn't a happy chap. But then I didn't have any money. So I went along to my accountant to see if he could put in my tax return so I could get a tax return to live on. And he said, "Oh, yeah, what are you up to, Woodsy?" And I said, "Oh, look, I'm building this thing and blah, blah, blah." And he said, "Oh, yeah." Then he rang me up a couple of days later and said, "I've got some guys who might want to invest in this." I said, "Oh, that'd be cool." So the deal was I put in the IP and they put in the money and we got 50% each. But the cleverness of the business model was we didn't need much capital because we take the money up front and pay the hotel after the guest has stayed. So it was a pretty neat funding model.
Graeme Wood is my guest on Curveball, and you're about to find out what happens when Wotif.com goes through its biggest transformation so far. I'm Kelly Reardon and this is Curveball. My guest is the entrepreneur and philanthropist Graeme Wood, who's about to do something he's never done before. So fast forward to 2006 and Wotif floated on the Australian Stock Exchange. Graeme, how different was your experience running a public company versus, a startup that you're hacking up along the way?
My first inclination, and totally agreed with the other board members, was that I would hand the reins over as CEO to somebody who had actually done it before. I think what they were saying was, look, nice job, Graeme, but, cowboys can't be CEOs of public companies and sometimes you're a bit hard to control. So I'd had a few dust-ups with some of the people, with the investors, just because I thought they were being too boring, there's that word again, and not adventurous enough. So I wasn't getting my way and I thought, well, it's a public company now. So I took a bit of a back seat and started scheming about other businesses.
Was that a difficult decision though? Because you had, you'd built the egg company, there were some other startups, but Wotif is really the baby that you put your blood, sweat and tears and your vodkas into when you've got no money.
Sure.
Was it difficult to step back and hand it over?
Not really. That was the longest job I'd ever had in my life, and it was growing. I forget how many people we had, 100, 200, I forget. And it was fun, but there's always something new around the corner, I guess.
Tell me about that ride, though, because it's a roaring success once Wotif goes public. I think the share price eventually kind of corrected itself a little bit. But how fun was it seeing it, at almost $8 a share in 2010? And then, kind of leading up to the IPO, what were you thinking?
We were pretty confident. The brokers who were underwriting it believed in it, and I think it listed at $2 something, 14.70. I've got a terrible memory for these things, and it did go to $8. The only thing I was pretty cranky about was that I didn't sell at $8 rather than $3 or whatever it was. But there you go.
Yeah, you did end up selling out your stake in 2014. So I think this is a decade and a half on for you. The payday is reported to be around $140 million. What's that like for a person who didn't have any money, after your marriage collapsed? Like, what's that like to then build, have no money, scrap it up, end up with $140 million in your pocket?
It's just a number, I guess, at the end of the day. I didn't rush out and buy a new car or do anything silly like that. I pretty quickly set up a foundation, which was tax effective, of course, which allowed me then to go and support environmental campaigns in a more profound way.
Now, this has been a lifelong passion, as you mentioned, since fishing in Moreton Bay off Brisbane. What were the causes that you first wanted to tackle? Because, the environmental issues that we have going on are plentiful. How did you pick where you could make an impact?
One of the things I did do when I had a few spare dollars was to get into yacht racing. And I bought a yacht and raced it to Hobart in the Sydney Hobart. As part of that, I really fell in love with Hobart because of its natural beauty and stepped straight into the forest wars that were raging down there at the time between Bob Brown's Greenie mob and the loggers. So supporting the anti-logging campaign was really one of the great drivers for me. I also, I think in 2010, I made a donation to the Greens that helped them get the balance of power in the Senate, which was a great deal of satisfaction because that really screwed up the ambitions of a whole bunch of conservatives who've hated me ever since.
I am interested. I can absolutely tell you're a ratbag, Graeme, right? You're in there stirring the pot at every step of the way. And so I'm wondering then how you approached your work as a philanthropist and an environmentalist, where ultimately you've got to get some kind of concession or collaboration happening versus, when you're a for-profit business leader, you can kind of get in there and you're the boss and you can, make people do what you want to some degree. How did you shift your leadership style in the environment space?
Yes, look, it was more identifying the really potent leaders, the great strategists in that world, and there are some. There are brilliant people there. So I listened to them and basically took their counsel about which campaign to support, which organisation works, which one doesn't. And I'm pretty much out of that now. Anna Cernias, who I've been with for, 15 years or something, has taken all that over. So she's a more detailed person, which again is a safe thing for the foundation, whereas I'd make rather quick and rash decisions, and some of them didn't, deliver the goods the way we would hope.
So, Graeme, tell me how a passionate environmentalist then came to purchase what I think is one of the world's largest wood chipping mills.
So guns were the evil empire in logging in Tasmania. They owned the Tribunal wood chip mill, which was at one stage the largest in the world. But they were also trying to build a pulp mill in northern Tasmania. So naturally, I was very involved in a campaign to stop the pulp mill being built, which eventually worked. But in order to get social license to build a pulp mill, they decided they would stop wood chipping at Tribunna. The wood chipping was becoming, it wasn't a very lucrative game to be in anyway, but they thought if we make a big deal of stopping native forest logging for wood chips, everyone will like us, and so, they won't stop the pulp mill. Well, that was a mistake. So they had closed the wood chip mill down, and there were a bunch of loggers, a consortium, who were trying to buy it to start it up again. We were well aware of this, and another philanthropist and I said, well, what's the price? And they wanted 16. The other crowd were prepared to pay 16 million allegedly, but they could never turn up with the money. So we said, what about, say, 12? And they ummed and ahed, but they were...
Cash in the hand?
Well, no. But then they were... I knew they were very short of funds. So I said, okay, what about 10 cash 7 days? No due diligence, just let's, shake hands and there you go. And that's what happened. So we bought a wood chip mill. Now, what do you do with a wood chip mill? Hard to know. I flew to Hobart with the other philanthropist who said... I hadn't met her before. We were walking across the tarmac and she said, there might be some media here. Sure enough, the TV crews were there and said, what are you doing? What are you going to do with the wood chip mill? And she looked at me and I looked at her and I said, we're going to turn it into an ecotourism resort. And that was the first time
Did you make that up on the spot?
I made that up on the spot because I didn't have a clue what to do with it. It was, and it kind of ended up that way, sort of. So that's how I bought it, yes.
The locals weren't that happy when you bought the sawmill though either. So how did you convince them that this was the right thing to do? Because, I guess people in the local economy do want a beautiful natural environment. It's why they live in Tasmania, but that's also how they get their work.
Yes, there were, I think, 24 full-time equivalents working at the mill when we bought it, and pretty much every one of them lived in the local town of Tribunna. And we were very conscious that if we wanted to build a more viable long-term economic future for these people, we had to have them on side. So we kept employing a lot of them. We kept using, when we went into construction phase, we used a lot of the local contractors who'd been working at the mill forever. So number one was basically keep feeding them, but also engaging with them culturally. We'd have music events with the local school. We helped them build a kitchen garden thing. So we put quite an effort into understanding and helping out the locals where we could.
Your other passion is around a free press and plurality of viewpoints. What made you decide to invest in media, which in some ways is a bad bet at the moment, but you invested in the Global Mail digital startup and also to the Guardian's ventures in Australia?
Yes, I was very concerned about the gradual drift of the Australian media, concentration, number one, but also the gradual drift towards right-wing thinking. And I dabbled with a few ideas about what to do to stop that. And the idea of the Global Mail came up, and I thought that's pretty cool. I'll get a whole lot of progressive journos, put them in a room and see what we can do. It didn't have any real business model around it, and I'm not even sure how I intended to make money out of it. But it was fun putting that together. But then, for some reason or other, I'd met Malcolm Turnbull, and he and I chatted about tech investments and stuff occasionally. And one day he came along and said, look, I understand The Guardian want to come to Australia. Why don't you ditch this Global Mail thing and go see them? So I did. Went and saw Alan Rusbridger, who was editor-in-chief at the time. And he said, yes, we would like to come to Australia, but it's too early. We've just invested in the US, and the US wasn't going all that well for them. And he said, maybe in 2 years' time. And I said, well, what if I paid you some money to do it? Would that make a difference? And he said, well, yes, it would, Graeme, thank you. So we settled on a figure of 25 million. Which would fund them through the first, year or two or three, on the basis that once they became profitable, they would repay that 25 million. And that's what actually happened. So I put in the money and got it back.
These days, having a wide variety of views, it's largely about that media monopoly. So Channel 9 and Fairfax newspapers have merged now. News Limited has collapsed a lot of their state-based reporting international. ARN Media, which owns Kiss FM and Gold FM, have purchased a stake in the Southern Cross Stereo network. What dangers do you see for us in Australia with this constant consolidation of media companies?
Oh, it's terrible. The concentration of a single voice, a conservative approach is very damaging for democracy, and it's very damaging for individuals in their daily lives. There aren't enough forums where people can feel that they can engage with media the way they used to. I guess that's all gone to social media, and that's a mess as well. So I don't have an answer to this except that it's problematic.
Will you continue to fund media ventures?
I've had a long interest in satire, and I've had a bit of a crack at that, but I've just run out of time recently to keep that going. I think satire is a very powerful leveller, and if it's good, then you can change the way people think, especially if you focus on political type figures. And, there's good stuff on the ABC, of course, that attempts to do that. So that's my only sort of tentative interest right now, is to get more people laughing at silly acts by politicians and evil business people.
Somehow I'm not surprised that that's on your agenda. Your partner in all these endeavours is also your partner in life, your wife Anna. You mentioned before she helps run the foundation. What makes the two of you such a great partnership?
I don't know, but it is, we just have common interests, and we love being with each other, and we travel together, we sail together, we work together. It's just a wonderful relationship.
Can you talk me through a sailing adventure? So if you're heading out into the great wild open seas of the Atlantic Ocean together, just the two of you on a boat, how does that unfold? What does the day look like?
The first time we sailed across the North Atlantic, we left Gibraltar, and I knew the Eastern Atlantic has much bigger seas than the Western Atlantic. And we'd never been in seas of that size. The swells are about 7 metres.
Oh, my God.
And so we sort of got out there fairly suddenly. The wind's behind you, which is a good thing. And I'm looking at these waves rearing up behind us, and I said to Anna, look, don't look back, just look forward. That's where we're going. You don't have to worry about what's going on behind us. I thought sooner or later one of these is going to break over us or something, but it didn't. So, after 3 or 4 days, we settled down and got into the routine. But it was a bit scary for the first week or so.
What about the pirates?
Oh, that's in the Caribbean, yes. We always, when we're crossing the Caribbean, there are places you simply don't go, and there have been some unfortunate incidents there. So I bought a flare gun, which is normally with flares, you just flick something and hold it up and it makes a red or yellow or green or whatever flare. I bought a gun that fired flares, and it looks like a gun. It's like a sawn-off shotgun. And I bought that so that if somebody did come alongside and, said, I'm a pirate and I want whatever I want, I was going to pull out the flare gun and point it at them and maybe fire it, and that might scare them off.
You're like the real-life version of the cover art for this podcast, Curveball, which is, a little person afloat in the ocean on their own.
Oh, yes.
A giant wave coming down at them. So I love this. Have you learned anything philosophically, I guess, on a boat that's perhaps saved you in the boardroom?
When you get out of the shipping lanes, so when you're crossing the Atlantic, it's amazing you don't see another vessel for days and days and days. It's really interesting. What does that teach you? I guess it's meditative in a way. And everything you do, your life depends on what you do sort of every hour of the day, checking navigation, looking out for obstacles, keeping an eye out for unlit vessels at night and illegal fishing vessels. There's a few risks out there, and not falling over. That's a key one. With two people on board, if the one on watch falls overboard, that's it. Goodbye. So we have rules around. You don't go and have a pee over the rail, for example.
Good advice. I hope you take that into the boardroom.
So in terms of direct input, I can't say there's any. I wouldn't recommend everyone on a board go and sail across an ocean unless, if you get seasick, it's a very bad idea.
So what's the one piece of advice or the thing that you've taken away across all of these many careers that you've had that you would impart upon the next generation of entrepreneurs?
Well, keep looking for opportunities. Never close your mind. You walk around a corner and you see something that isn't right, or there's a buck to be made, or people are doing something silly. Always be prepared to at least put your toe in the water and say, what if I did this? Or, can I change the way this institution works? There are too many people going to sleep at their desks here. There's something wrong. What can we do to get some energy into this place? Because at the end of the day, we're not much more than a ball of energy. And if you're not using that to the fullest extent, then you're kind of cheating yourself and all your friends and families. That's what I think.
Well, congratulations on Wotif and the many other adventures and endeavours. And thank you for coming on Curveball.
You're very welcome, Kelly. Thank you so much.
Philanthropist and environmentalist Graeme Wood. Make sure you're following Curveball in your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. Curveball's produced by Dead Set Studios on the lands of the Turrbal and Yuggera people. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. This episode was produced by Liam Reardon and Rachel Fountain, and you can find out more at curveballshow.com.